Welcome back, everybody. We have the WagMe crew back here with another video. Today, we're talking bull and bear cases. Where are we headed next? That's really the big topic of this video today. So we're going to dive into some charts. We're going to talk some other sentiment and give you guys the latest scoop. So first off, just to kind of create a frame of reference here, we just want to talk about the Bitcoin chart. And here, this is just the daily chart that we're looking at first, and then we'll take a look at on a larger time frame what we're kind of looking at in terms of chart structure. But here's the daily chart, and what you're going to notice, obviously, is we had this crazy run up just in the last week or so, week and a half, close to 30% at the height of it. But really, what's happened here, and we've been talking about this before we recorded and everything, but basically, right before we ran up, we were kind of at this, 15, 16K level, and we came up and tapped this pre-FTX high. And so what we're looking for right now is basically a bounce off of that pre-FTX high to then stand up here and then go further in that kind of next leg, so closer to 25K. But obviously, we have a lot of different headwinds coming down the pipeline, a lot of other concerns as well. But right now, kind of the main thing that we're watching out for is, will this pre-FTX high be reclaimed at about 21K? And then we're looking for a stand there and then going further up from that area. One thing I would note is on the daily, we're looking quite over bought. So, once you get out of this kind of 70 range for the RSI, that typically says that we're overbought and that we're kind of headed maybe to come down on the daily chart. But if we look over really, really quickly at the weekly chart, the RSI actually looks a little bit more favorable. So we're looking not quite as over bought on that side. We're looking a lot more evened out. So, we're looking at more of like a 50, 45, 50 RSI as opposed to what we were looking at over there, above 70. So in terms of the chart, on the weekly side, it's looking rather strong, whereas on the daily side, we do have kind of some likely volatility coming up and maybe a downtrend in the super short term. But I don't know if you guys have any immediate thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's it's important because that pre-FTX level is really going to be a psychological level as well for this market. I mean, really all that happened right there is FTX collapsed, right? I mean, that was a massively big piece of news, not just within crypto, but within the entire economy, right? And so it's really crazy to see that massive move upwards. And I think that's why a lot of people are calling this a bull trap. I think, like you said, it's going to be important not to just pierce that level, but actually to hold that level as support. And that's what will allow us to get a little bit higher here as we kind of continue to watch some of these charts. I think today was our first down day in a while, it looks like, and we kind of bounced right off of that level. So we'll see kind of what the rest of the week continues to bring, if we continue to move a little bit lower, or if we can pop up above this and actually hold that as support moving forward. That's going to be kind of the telltale sign of what this looks like. I think all of that being said, that's kind of more a short-term swing trader or day trader kind of look at Bitcoin. It should be interesting to see how this continues to play out with, like you mentioned, right, some of these pretty negative macro headwinds. If we are either in a recession or headed towards a recession, depending on how you look at it, right? It should be interesting to see exactly what sort of impact that might have on Bitcoin as a whole. And then, of course, the market as a whole, because Bitcoin is still trading like a risk on asset as we kind of continue forward here. So super good analysis. I think it's interesting when you kind of zoom out, you start to see the RSI not be as oversold, I suppose. And so, it's just important to think in the long term, right? If you are a long-term investor, it's still probably good to start your accumulations around here and start your DCAing. So if you're trying to be kind of one of those 5-10 year play type of individuals, I think we've been in an area that you can feel comfortable buying at for a while. Even if it does go down, it doesn't necessarily make or break anything that's going down. I think what's going to be important as far as what the trend looks like down the line, and for some of these day traders will be kind of these next couple of days.
Yeah, and I think, we really saw ourselves sitting at this level for months in the second half of 2022. And it's a great point that there's a lot of headwinds coming or already existing, and that right before that cliff drop right there, we had still seen a lot of bearish news in the crypto industry. So, I'm hoping that we once again find some resistance right here and settle, be able to establish a good footing. When you look at moving up higher to 25,000, 30,000, it's something where you don't expect to really go that high with, basically the news that's happened in 2022. It's tough to forget about Three Arrows, Terra Luna, everything that really took us down to the levels that we're at right now. But yeah, I think it was a strong push that we saw, and something where in the next couple months, talking at a macro level, it looks like the Federal Reserve is starting to slow their hikes. And I think we saw last week the Bank of Japan was buying more bonds, so essentially sending more money into the markets. And so you could see why there were indicators for this to happen. And, obviously that's looking in hindsight, and it's tough to see in the moment. But yeah, you could see where there's certain things turning in the macro environment where we could continue to see growth in this Bitcoin market.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up, just as frame of reference, is the more like the larger S&P 500 chart, right? Because even though we all would love for Bitcoin and the larger markets to be decoupled, they're really still quite correlated. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the SPY, the S&P 500 chart does just in the next little bit here. This is the daily chart, and it hasn't quite had the same. I guess we have seen a similar run up when Bitcoin was going 20-30%. We saw SPY go closer to like 8%. But again, that's how much like people will take in terms of like a year gain on the S&P 500, right? Like 8 to 9 to 10% is a great year on the S&P 500. And we did that in like a recovery phase in a week, right? And so, still Bitcoin and the S&P 500 pretty correlated. And so I think a lot of it's going to, be kind of dictated on the larger markets too. But then again, we don't know, as kind of the supply shrinks, or as more Bitcoin get mined and we get closer to that 21 million mark, maybe we start to see a little bit of a difference there and it starts to decouple. But as of now, we also need to pay attention to how equities are doing, because they tend to kind of lead the market too.
Yeah, and I think in the bearish perspective, at the second half of 2022, we were talking about how we almost could see a double top in inflation. In the last couple months, we saw inflation seem to spike, and then in the last couple months, it's come down a little bit. And I think that's like an indicator, a bullish indicator, seeing that maybe we've seen peak inflation. There was a lot of people in late 2022 talking about how we could see a double top with inflation. And so, you haven't heard a lot of chatter about that recently, but that was obviously still something that was on the mind in late 2022, and something to watch out for, I guess, when you're looking at this from a bearish perspective.
Absolutely. And I think from I guess more of the bullish case comparing inflation to last year, the Fed, like you said, is planning on slowing down rate hikes. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects some of the market as well. We've seen supply come back down in terms of the housing market. So we've actually seen just over the last couple of months, we came off of this kind of high here of 10.1, and then we're back down to 8.6, so closer to where we were back in late 2010, early 2011. Still a really, really high supply based on what we've seen the last couple of years, but it isn't this kind of huge sustained spike that we saw between 2021 and 2022. So we've at least seen some sort of level off here. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. I know you guys were sharing some interesting anecdotes before about like, where builders are at, and, the fact that mortgages are being pulled out from, and contracts aren't being followed through on. And so it's going to be interesting to see, because the housing market also kind of starts to dictate where the larger market equities, all that's going to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I to your point, I think we saw certain metrics in the housing market return to highs that hadn't been seen since 2008. When you're talking about the amount of mortgage contracts that were canceled or basically backed out of. And, that's something where it's obviously a red flag. We've seen house sales fall for 7 straight months. And so, like you're saying, it's a lagging indicator, but we're seeing signs at the moment. It could also be a lagging indicator of a bullish run coming forward, and that's something where like I said, we've seen 7 months straight of falling home sales. Is it time where that turns around and, maybe we don't see a sharp increase, but they go flat and we start to see that market get a little healthier. So tough to say, it feels like we're kind of maybe at an inflection point right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting to see what happens over the next couple weeks and couple months. Our favorite people, I feel like, are still kind of in control, right? It really is dependent on the Fed, and if they, do what we're expecting them to do from a market perspective, if they do slow down rates, if they cut rates at some point, right? That's really what's going to, at this point, impact the market. I know China announced that they were opening up a lot of their economy, which that could have a big impact on the supply side as well, which could potentially take down inflation. I've heard cases that we could actually increase some of the inflation as well. So we'll see what sort of impacts that might have after pretty much being locked up for 2-3 years from COVID. So, there's a lot of interesting news coming out. It's just a matter of what does that do to inflation, and then how convicted is the Fed in getting inflation down. Ultimately, I think that's what's going to either help our market to tear a little bit more upwards or tear it down a little bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, some really good points there. And I think one last thing before we wrap up here, Mata, I don't know if you still have that market cycle chart open, but I think that gives a good perspective on like we could either be in this area or we could either be here, and this is kind of what we're looking at next, right? And I think just zooming out for a second might just kind of help set the stage and wrap things up pretty nicely.
Yeah, so this is a tweet from Plan B. You might all recognize kind of this chart, right? It's the Wall Street cheat sheet for basically bubbles popping and market cycles. And so we all know that we've kind of seen some of this thrill, euphoria, complacency, all of these pieces. I think the big debate is, where are we at now? If you ask Plan B, right, he feels we're over here in the disbelief realm, where everyone's saying it's a bull trap when it's really the start of the next bear market. So thinking that it's ready to kind of pump upwards from here. And then others are saying we're somewhere in this kind of anger to capitulation phase, maybe even moving towards a piece of this depression. So I think the big indicator is we all know that we've popped, right? The question is, at what point of this kind of capitulation or sideways move piece are we? And when is the next bull market going to come? Do you have any additional commentary on that, Sia?
No, I think that's super helpful, just kind of in like setting the stage of where we could be at and kind of what the next move could be. I think a lot of what I hear people talking about too is like, where's the money going to come from to fund that kind of next leg up? And I think, it's been just a recurring theme as we talk through a lot of these topics, that it's not like, us three with our weekly DCAs or monthly DCAs that's like sending Bitcoin to 25, 30K, right? It's institutions seeing the opportunity on their balance sheet to go pick up some Bitcoin and doubling down and saying, okay, this is a good time to buy. So the main question is, when do those people say, okay, well, now is the time to kind of get into the market and send it higher. So it's going to be interesting to see where we head from here.
Yeah, and this isn't financial advice, and you should do your own research, but I'd love to hear from you guys. What are some metrics, or maybe one metric that you guys are looking at to, determine where the markets go next, where if it's a bull run or a bear run, what's that one metric that you're really looking at right now?
I don't know if there's really one metric for me. I feel like looking at it more holistically, like how we have been with, what the Fed plans are, What do we look like just from like a chart perspective? Obviously charts can be wrong too. I always like looking at like the 200-day simple moving average and seeing if we can stay above that. Typically when we're below that, it's been a good time to buy historically on Bitcoin. And so if we can, at any point, and I'll, just really, really quickly, because it's hard to talk about it without having it pulled up. I'll just pull it up really quickly for reference. And of course, that's the wrong Bitcoin chart. Pull the other one up. Oh, still the wrong one. My bad, peeps. Third time's the charm. All right. So the 200-day simple moving average, like I always like to look at this whenever we're below this from a chart perspective, it tends to be a decent time to buy. Obviously, you wouldn't want to always buy, at 47K. I mean, we were buying kind of down this the whole way. And obviously when you DCA, that's fine. But, if you look back here when we were below it, back here, when we were below it here, like those were always great times to buy. And we've been below it for quite some time. And now we're trying to kind of break back above that. So I like that from a chart perspective. But I think mostly if we're trying to talk about when we're going to turn around or when something's going to change, like you kind of need to take a more holistic perspective.
Yeah, I'm not going to act like I track the market or am any TA expert, that's for sure. But definitely moving averages like Alex just mentioned, right? I see RSI used a lot just to understand if it's overbought or oversold. And that obviously can be manipulated based on the time length that you're looking at it. But I think for me, it's just I don't exactly know what's going to happen. So my pretty much goal is to continue stacking Bitcoin because of my conviction in it and what I believe. So as long as I'm buying at these prices, I feel pretty comfortable with it going and shooting higher past the all-time high at some point. It's just a question of when.
Those are wise words. I like it.
Very well put. Well, I think that wraps it up for our kind of look at the bull and bear cases. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you guys like what you heard, like what you saw here. We'll be back next week with another video, giving you guys more insight into the crypto and financial markets. But until then, wag me.